the number was just around 5. It was about 5.6 at the time. It's now over 7. So it's now, within 5 years, there's at least another 2 people involved in making the decision to choose your firm over a competitor firm. So what does that mean? It means there's a lot more people involved in the selection process, in the process of choosing you guys. But there's a lot more alignment that has to occur inside of these organizations. So a lot more alignment now than ever before. And that tends to mean problems, right? The more people we have to get aligned to a single view, the less likely we are to see that view actually occurring, right? Which is increasing the complexity of both the provider as well as the buyer. And then there's a lot of friction inside these firms. You, I'm sure, have seen that the hoops that we have to now jump through in order to have a contract, a successful contract with a client, are increasing, whether it's provisions such as anti-money laundering or some of the legal provisions that have been layered on top, or even just the procurement and legal operations kind of friction that's occurring inside the kind of contracting processes. It's much harder to change supplier, to change law firm, which could be good and bad, right? So if you're if it's an existing client, maybe that's a little bit of good news, though I worry about the loyalty factor, of course, but bad for folks trying to switch out between a competitor firm. So just a little taste of some of the things that are going on the client side. And then on our side, and some of this won't be, I suspect, a surprise to you, we spent a lot of time interviewing top performing business developers, understanding what they're doing, surveying them, as well as the average performer. So the folks that have those kind of middle books of business, the average book of business. And from the average ones, these are probably quite good lawyers, great lawyers in the business of law and in their legaling abilities, but inside of their business development, they're quite average. And what they say are things like this, and you may have heard some of these. I don't have enough time for BD. I'm just too busy with my billable work. I don't like doing business development. Business development is hard, so I'll do basic marketing things like blogs and speaking. I'm a trusted advisor. I'm not a salesperson, often in a refrain to, why don't you go call the client? As I'm ranked in Chambers or a ranking service, the clients will find me. So a lot of the average performing lawyers spend a lot of their time talking themselves out of doing business development, which is a huge, huge problem. All right, so a little view from the client side, a little view from what we're hearing from many of the top performing and average performing partners that we work with and survey. Let's jump into a group discussion. Stephen, did you want to tee this one up, or do you want me to go at it?
Fine, you take it away, Rory. Just one point on the last one that's missed out is that I think I often hear the refrain coming from partners that business development is not real work, and they're there to do real work. And I think that's still quite prevalent in a lot of law firms.
Yeah, it's a great one. Yeah, which is, and I think we've become very aware that it's very much part of the job now, right? Yeah, terrific. All right, so let's open up for the group discussion. We're gonna basically just kind of get you guys to start talking a little bit and get your responses. A little bit of content up front there. We thought we'd take each one of these different. So let's ask the question: Is business development actually evolving? Do you guys buy the initial thesis that it is actually evolving? It's actually evolving quite quickly. And if it is, what's the impact of these 4 things? So let's start with, do you guys see it? Do you see it evolving?
I'll jump in. I certainly have. I mean, when I first started at Sherman & Sterling, and I as a business developer, not as a lawyer, I was employed by a journalist, and it was all about rankings and PR, really, and that was what, 2000. And since that point, obviously the whole profession has evolved, and it's evolved to the point where I think CRM to existing clients is almost like it's kind of like the mantra. I've got my own views on that, but it certainly has evolved from my perspective. I'd listen to the group and find out what other people's views are, but from my perspective, I can see a definite evolution.
I'm Nitin Chauhan from Howell Benjamin in London. I certainly think that COVID has increased the use of technology Stephen and Rory, thank you for putting up this list. I mean, but I don't necessarily think that that's been conducive to business development, because I'm still quite a traditionalist, where I'd like to sit down with somebody, understand them, their business, their requirements, and do that in a face-to-face scenario, whereby a lot of clients, particularly those that are time-starved, tend to want to have meetings either via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and in that time, like often you see people, they're trying to do 3 things at once whilst trying to at the same time have a discussion with you in the background. So it's often not as focused, and I can understand the difference between, I mean, technology is wonderful, and we've got all these people from all around the world today having this discussion. So there are pros and cons to it, but in terms of BD, I certainly see winning new clients and technology often don't go hand in hand.
Yeah, listen, it's a really good point, and I think COVID has certainly brought in technology to this whole debate. But also, in terms of that relationship development, which you're talking about there, I think the traditional way, do people think that that is lessened with the introduction of procurement teams, with legal ops, with, you're not simply dealing with the general counsel or chief exec or the CFO anymore? There's a whole array, as Rory was saying, of people. So what's the impact of that?
I'll just chime in, shall I? Or sorry, Nitin, are you responding to that question? Go ahead.
No, Hannah, please answer. But if I could just maybe respond quickly, Stephen, I think you're right. It just then adds more layers of people between you and getting to that person, and then technology adds another layer of distance. So that's certainly my. I mean, we're a mid-sized firm in London, and whilst we have procurement teams and lots of contacts and things like that, it's just my own take on how traditional relationships have suffered as a result of COVID. But I'll let Hannah contribute as well. Thank you.
No, thanks. Hi everybody, I'm Hanem. Currently KPMG Law, we're former Zico Law, integrated to KPMG Law as of December 1st last year. I think we talk about business development. You look at the, most of us who started their careers in the early 90s, there were regulations actually in the profession. We're not supposed to be doing marketing in any forms. I mean, it's a very conservative profession to start with. And that has definitely changed over the years. So I remember Zico, when we started out, we were the first firm in Malaysia that had a website, and that was frowned upon by the Bar Council. You're not supposed to have a website. Nowadays, you do, it's as Stephen said, it is because the evolving of our clients evolving, the way their share of wallets and how they purchase makes it very important for BD in law firms to also evolve to respond to the requirements of the client, which is a lot more complex in terms of course, the world being flat, using technology to connect, the approaches of different it used to be word of mouth, I think, this profession, but now all the other things like publications, gimmicks, or fancy tools will also help. And yeah, in terms of the different professionals in the firm, you talk about multi-stakeholderism. So the firm is successful because of its multi-stakeholders. It's not just the partners anymore that is the success of the firm. It is the different components of the firm that makes the success of the firm. That's my point of view.
Yeah, there's a thread in here as well, right? So, but both of your comments, thank you for them, where there's even though it's changing, there's some stability in what we're trying to do with these clients, and that stability, I think, is still surrounding this concept of trust, right? So, then in your concept of the Zoom, I think one of the things that we're seeing in some of the science is that the Zoom isn't very good at building trust. Actually, it's good at keeping connection, but you don't have the same triggers as you do in person. As if you go back before Zoom, we all knew that if we had a troubled client, we would get, we'd go visit, we'd go spend some time in person. We knew that was a difference. We knew that was going to make a difference than just calling them up. And Zoom has that kind of tendency to kind of make us feel like we had done that piece of work, making the effort to go see them in person and spending that time. It's not quite the same. And so I think there is something in So there's some stability in some of the way these relationships need to get built, whether the technology or not is used. And then I think you're absolutely right, Henning, that the evolution has happened and happened quite quickly in some ways, right? So, and it's continuing to happen because the technology is evolving. What about new approaches as well, guys? Have we adjusted our approaches, notwithstanding the use of using some technologies like Zoom, but have we changed our approaches, do you think?
Patrick, can I comment?
Rory, it's Keith. I just a couple of comments, and I'm coming from Hong Kong, which, as many of you know, had some of the most restricted practices in terms of ability to travel during Zoom. We weren't really able to travel at all. So when we eventually came out of the travel restrictions that were imposed in Hong Kong, getting out into the world after 3 years, getting back to meeting one's clients for the first time in 3 years, it was fascinating to actually get their feedback. And there was when I arranged at the back end of last year to get to Singapore for the first time, where we've got a lot of clients, the stampede, and it was a stampede of the clients to come and meet. That was interesting. What was also interesting was the quality of the meetings that took place, the time that was being given to those meetings, which would have historically been measured in 30 minutes to an hour. I noted with huge interest that people were willing to spend a considerable amount of time reconnecting, making exactly the points that have just been made with regard to Zoom. A question, then I'll shut up, but Rory, for you, and I'd be very interested to hear, in terms of new technology, new approaches, it would be very interesting to hear from you what clients are saying about their reliance on the new technologies, particularly the social engineering platforms and so on, the use of things like LinkedIn. I have this debate a lot, and I'd be very, very interested to hear what clients are actually saying about the value and utility that they get from those type of platforms in terms of the weight that is attributed to what content is placed on those platforms in terms of decision making.
Yeah, so great question, and we have some good data on it actually. But before I just jump in that, I'll give you another storyline of what you experienced in Singapore. I'm in the States, and when it opened up here, I started going back to conferences. So it wasn't as long as the Singapore period of time, but I noted at conferences a very strange change in behavior in those early days. People weren't sitting in the sessions. They were all congregating in the hotels and the meeting rooms outside, doing the same thing.
Yeah.
They were all meeting. They didn't want us. They don't want to learn. They wanted to meet, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
Indication of what the thirst is. On the LinkedIn point, which is a really good question, this often surprises firms that the number one source that they are actually checking lawyers out, certainly in the US and in Europe, is LinkedIn. It isn't the website. It isn't the phone. Yeah, it's the bio. The bio often doesn't actually get looked at, and you can go look at that on your own traffic. You can kind of compare, you know, the traffic coming in on the bio sites versus the new customer site, the new customers you're signing up, and you'll see there's not an awful lot of comparison there. We've done some of that work. Yeah. They're not actually looking at the bios, which is a shock to firms. They're like, wait, but I thought the bio was the number one entry point for clients. It turns out it's not. One of the reasons that, or a couple of the reasons that we're seeing why your clients are looking at LinkedIn so quickly, they're very used to that tool, right? So you're not the only vendor that they purchase. You know, legal services isn't the only thing that they do. And remember, you've got this large group as well looking. It's not just the GC, and they're very used to checking out suppliers on LinkedIn. That's the go-to platform for that. And so the likelihood of Chambers or your bios trumping that is quite slim. But secondly, there's another element that they're after, and which LinkedIn, your bios and your own information doesn't. They want to know who you know. So if Rory has 237 connections on LinkedIn, and he's supposed to be this big shot lawyer that's going to help me with this major acquisition, major M&A situation, and he only knows 230 people, that can't be good for me. I want him to know a lot of people. I want to know the people that he knows. I'm thinking about my own career. I'm thinking about all the things that could be an additional value add of working with Rory. And so that's the other kind of element that we're seeing. They're actually kind of curious to see how established you are inside of these networks, because those networks are valuable to them.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Roy. That is extremely helpful. And I'm not actually surprised by the feedback that you're getting, but it's very, very helpful to have it validated.
And Keith, I think there'll be a number of firms, excuse me, around who are investing quite significantly in support for LinkedIn, for partners and so on. So a lot of partners are still a little bit reluctant to this. So we have, and I think others will, have now a shift in traditional marketeers to social media and actually really supporting very closely what the partners post and almost, can I say, forcing them to post. But yeah, we'll come on to partners sort of with social media in due course. But I'd be interested to see if others, have got a similar focus on trying to build up the social network side.
Rory, I'm in Hong Kong. I have a question. I like LinkedIn and I use it quite a lot. And although this inspires me to improve things, and particularly my profile, but I do get feedback from anyone under 35 that this is a very strange old people's network.
That's correct. May I jump in maybe? My name is Kiki Gani. I have 3 sons and all are lawyers. I'm a lawyer. My wife is a lawyer. So they have their own firms. They're telling me, and I don't agree with that. That's why I always resisted, that almost a majority of their clients during the pandemic, they get through not through Zoom. Zoom is only in the implementation, not LinkedIn. It's Instagram.
Yeah.
It's Instagram. You want, but of course it depends on what you're after, right? Are you into the big companies, big clients who have procurement processes and requirements, or are you is your market? That's why the question in the beginning, market research is important. Or are you after startups with a younger demographic, right? But at the end of the day, after 40 years of practicing law, at the end of the day, there will be somebody there, out there, a potential client or a decision maker there who need legal services and can make a decision and contact. But of course, he cannot contact me if he doesn't know me, right? So at the end of the day, when the client needs legal services or the decision maker there, which could be the CEO or could be even the secretary. I often know of at least many Indonesian companies, quite sizable, who let their secretary call the lawyers, right? So there's some kind of decision discretion there with it. Whoever makes that decision will call me, but how do I achieve that? First they must know me. Second, they must remember me, and then third one, they must know how to contact me, right? So at the end of the day, that's the end result I want to achieve with new technologies, new approaches, outside law, sales training, etc. Right? Conferences are like, if we are honest, out of the 1,000 conferences we all attended, how many do we remember? And how many people we remember who spoke at this conference? Maybe not too many. Thank you.
Well, I guess it's easy to make sure you're remembered. The more important thing is it's for the right reasons.
Yeah, I mean, that's assuming that is the right reason, but there are one is not a Superman or a Supergirl or Superwoman, right? I mean, there will be 10 with the same attraction, right? With the same advantages, with the same competitive edge. In any, unless you have this absolute superstar with this more EQ, IQ than everybody else in the world. But that's the leaders. There are always leaders, 10 maybe in each industry. But what is about the others 2,000, right?
So one of the things, actually, to the last point here, the relationship component. So to both of your points around whether even to the point of, Julie, your point around, has LinkedIn moved off for the younger generation, which is an interesting topic, and we should touch on that just a little, I think. But to both of your points, there is a growing view from the research that we have that relationship is still very, very important in developing business. And if you think about, so you do have to be found, you do have to be found, right? You do have to create awareness for sure, and you do have to differentiate against other great lawyers in other great firms. But ultimately, the relationship is the biggest the biggest catalyst you have for business development. And one of the things that we've noted and seen now quite systematically is top client developers, people with large books of business, are very, very good at managing that network. That's what they do. They're strategic, right? They don't boil the ocean. They don't spread incredibly wide and just try and see what they can fish out of the entire ocean. They fish in very specific areas and they grow those networks very strategically. And so I think one of the things that is kind of, if you like, withstanding all of these shifts that's happening is this ability to manage a relationship that delivers value. And so it leads to who's in that relationship, how many people do I have, what types of firms, client firms am I targeting, what types of people do I need in that network, and then how do I go find them? And whether it's conferences or whether it's, you know, putting out broader content into the marketplace, or whether it's using social media platforms of different types, those are all tools, I think, but the ultimate thing that we have to really worry about is this network.
And Rory, from my point, because I'm conscious of time here, this is a 10-minute discussion, which I think we've gone past already, but from what I'm hearing, that there are different stages of that evolution of a relationship. You know, where a partner is managing his network of fairly mature clients and making sure that's looked after is probably different to the LinkedIn, Instagram, you know, whichever social media you're using, which is maybe at an earlier stage to build up that relationship. But what I'm heartened about is that the two top poll questions were about market research and about client needs, client feedback. And I think understanding how you interact with the clients at all those stages is really important to do, and you understand and you're aware of it. So what I'd like to just try and do, if we can, is just move on, is how do you teach that level of sophisticated business development to your lawyers or your partners? And going into another discussion, you know, what have you found the most effective, or possibly the least effective methods of teaching BD to partners and to your associates? So up on the screen, you should see teaching lawyers BD skills that stick. So you're investing money in that, and that doesn't disappear straight away as soon as they walk out of the room or wherever you're teaching them. And what have you found to be the most effective BD training or teaching?
Maybe to kick off this session, I think what is the worst actually in my experience is when the lawyer is up for partnership and then the decision is made based on whether he has or she has or don't have business development skills. I think at that point it's already too late. Our better experience we had with modules for business development, which we start from the time the lawyer is still a trainee, and then build up gradually, and then start with smaller clients, give them smaller accounts, and let them get bigger and bigger accounts, plus a monetary incentive in whatever form will help in most cases. Thank you.
So I love that, and I've heard a firm, a chairman of a large firm say, why are we training associates in business development? So I agree with you, but why is this? Why is there still this kind of, at some very senior parts of these firms, this belief that we shouldn't be training associates, do you think?
Well, the associates must also feel their own benefit over their career. Over their career, say 10 years up, 7 to 10 years up until they are eligible for partnership. The youngest one think of life, work and lifetime, life balance, right? Between work and their life, they have another life outside the office. And for this business development skill, they feel there is no monetary reward for that. If there would be, that would be a totally different ballgame.
So if you incentivize them and you train them and then you start earlier,
yeah,
good thing.
Yeah. So they have 7-8 years to gradually increase that skill, because to ask from a, say, 30-something-year-old lawyer or somebody who's up for partnership at that age, and how many clients can you get? I mean, that's too late at that point of time.
I think style of leadership is fascinating here, because I mean, at my firm in Hong Kong, for a number of years, one of the challenges we've had is to be able to persuade our associates to get out and put their shoulder to the wheel in marketing. We were constantly challenged because the people, from that constituency said, actually, we don't want to do this. We're here to practice law and so on. And we've recognized over the years the importance of leadership in terms of trying to cajole, persuade our associates. So I think it comes from the top, to be frank, and we have changed our approach, where we have at our firm gone out with our associates with a deliberate purpose to try and persuade them to change that mindset, and slowly but surely that is having an effect, but it's come from top down.
I think, if I may, I tend to agree with that, because partners sometimes in some firms would even want to monopolize discussions with clients. But I think the best way to make associates and junior lawyers appreciate the value of client or business development is to expose them to the clients early on, allow them to develop confidence, whether this be in the courtroom or in discussions with clients, so that they can very well see that a business relationship with a client will be a most valuable asset for them to be considered for partnership.
Great.
Yeah.
Sorry. Business development should be part of the role of every lawyer. There are lawyers who don't really have the personality and attracting people. They could do a very good job drafting a proper reply to the court or even article or something, but they are not people person, as they say, so they cannot get connected very well. So there are people who are very good in attracting more clients, more things, but they are not really good in doing a proper good legal work. So sometimes if you have someone who you think that his personality is not really good in mingling with people and getting closer to them, so those people, you just keep them doing the work in the office, and you just refer the work to them to do the work. From the ones that are very good in getting the personality that meet with people and attract more clients. This is one. Second, it is a duty of every lawyer actually to try to get more work. And the duty is either whether you teach them how, of course you have to teach them. If they are a trainee with you or they are working with you, you have to push them in that direction. And not only going to conferences or even meeting people in the elevators, maybe that you can get them as a client one day, but just having a good work, good feedback from the client they are dealing with, where they have really good feedback, good connection, and that client will keep referring work to us, to that lawyers, because he was happy with the communication, not only the outcome of the court, of the case or the transaction, but also the communication, the ease of communication, being accessible, there's so many things where you might have this connection with the client, where the client will be becoming happy. When he is happy, he will keep referring work and suggest your name to other client as well. Thank you.
Those are great points. I think, Rory, some of the other things that, looking at junior lawyers, we've already talked about social media, and actually, it's quite a natural home for a lot of junior lawyers, and actually they can probably do as good a job, with supervision, obviously, but there's probably a greater enthusiasm in some cases for them to operate in some of those media where maybe some of the partners are less comfortable, actually. So they can work hand in glove with a partner or with others on those sort of things. And the other thing is that law firms will often unknowingly disincentivize associates from doing BD because the focus on hours and bonuses for hours and so on gives a very strong message to the associates about what's expected, even if you say you need to be doing BD as part of your job. But if the rewards are simply on hours, then it does actually say very strongly to the associates that BD is less important than hours. But as you mentioned, Ganya, earlier on, incentivizing to some degree, you get what you reward. So look at that. And the other thing is, how easy do we make it for associates to go out and interact with some of their contemporaries? Because claiming expenses back, simple things like that, how easy do you make it? Do you give them a budget of a small amount of money so they can call on that very easily? Or does it have to go through an expense project where they have to wait maybe weeks or months to get their money back? Just small things like that to incentivize them. We found it's quite effective. But the other thing is traditional training and having processes. It's interesting. You think that, well, that doesn't really help with relationship, but actually talking about partners with big networks, often those partners quite religiously do go through and contact their network around things. They send out small snippets of interest and value to their clients. And that often is a process. And some of the best salespeople have a very process-orientated way of doing business development. And you can back that up. You can support that part through the BD teams or so on. And that's something we've trained some of our lawyers on putting together how you listen to clients, how you respond to clients, how you extract the client needs from in a conversation. So you have really good conversations with clients that actually build trust, but at the same time, take your relationship forward and don't just go in a coffee loop where you keep having coffee and nothing happens.
Stephen, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just make
yeah.
just one point? I think Mr. Al-Sawadi, I hope I pronounced that correctly, had made a very good point that it's not a one shoe fits all. There are individuals who do want to be there at their desks working and doing the work, and then there are obviously people who are quite good at networking and building those relationships. And so sometimes it's identifying within, as a partner or a manager, to identify those people and their strengths. So look at your team, look at your associates, work out and play to the strengths of that, rather than almost have a blanket sort of approach to teach everybody the same thing. I certainly, from a large firm, I've worked at very large firms and then worked at smaller practices and currently, sort of in a mid-sized thing. And certainly those lessons that I've learned, I've tried to instill in those people that I can see will really benefit from that. Not to say I ignore the others, but I try to differentiate people as a result of that.
Yeah, maybe also one reason one might think it is short-sighted actually for a young aspiring lawyer wanting to get incentivized for business development skills. But maybe if I take me who comes from older generation, the whole purpose of becoming a lawyer is to become a partner, and especially after COVID, that's no longer valid for them. It maybe takes in good years in the past, it maybe takes 5-6 years to become a partner. Now it's maybe 10 years, right? And then they think during this 10 years to develop business development skills, while the fruits or the results will only be enjoyed by the firm, while they themselves don't want to become a partner in that firm long term. What for?
Just a quick word on timing. We're 8:45, so I know this stuff's going really well, but I'll leave it, Stephen, your show. But just to give you a quick warning on time there.
Stephen, you're on mute.
Yeah, Rory, just to illustrate sort of the point about individuals, if you want to put up the next slide. I mean, traditional desk learning, should we say, where you train BD, I think what we've seen is that your investment is sort of at the top line there, and the retention of anything people learn falls away pretty quickly. And we're asking you to try and guess which one of those lines is a partner line in terms of how much they retain out of business development. But traditional business development, sitting at a desk, learning about how to sell to clients, is something which is not retained particularly well. And the fall away we've found, the investment that you make in that sort of training does fall away very, very quickly indeed. And your investment, the return on investment is low. The exception, what we've tried to do is to put a program in place, as you mentioned, I think, Ganya, is a long-term program module, backed up though by research, backed up by templates, backed up by things to support the interview, the associate. So there's materials, then there's constant refresh. Now it still doesn't necessarily get there, but it helps change some mindsets. And it's into almost against you, but we've put everybody through that. Because there are some people, as you say, that maybe aren't there, but often the different personalities will fit with different people, which is why I love the idea of partners taking, as Keith said, partners taking juniors out to business development meetings. And we almost force that to happen because there's huge benefit from the associates witnessing and experiencing those sort of meetings, and meetings that don't go well. Often you learn more from that, and then debriefing. So make a real effort to take the associates and juniors to those meetings, because and actually we often set that up with the client beforehand, and the client appreciates, I think, to some extent, that you're not going to charge. And you say, this is a business development meeting, but please, I want to bring my associate, and that goes down extremely well with client and builds the trust, because there's an investment there in the people that he or she is going to be working with. So Rory, did we just want to move on to the next section?
A couple of thoughts on this one, and to the many great points that you guys have made. I think we all align a little bit to, we should be starting earlier, right? We should be starting to train on business development earlier in the associate ranks, to Stephen's point and to Keith's point around, like, let's get these folks engaging their peers and doing some very productive work there. But the problem probably starts even earlier than that. I mean, if you go to law schools and you look at what they're teaching, they're not teaching business development skills. And so right away, even out of law school, young lawyers are feeling that that's something mysteriously different and unique, and something that's not, I don't know what that is, right? So already from law school, they feel it's not for that, it's not their thing, it's somebody else's thing, and it's over there. And so I think this combination of, can we get them as early as we can, understanding the mechanics, the science, what's going on inside of this relationship building world? Can we teach them some basic best practices, understanding for sure that everybody has a slightly different approach and should have a slightly different approach, but there are some fundamental truths, if you like, in how you go to market. And there's some fundamental kind of processes and core skills / capabilities that we should teach them, that we believe should be based on what world-class looks like, both inside and outside of law. So I think the thing that we haven't talked a lot about, but law has insulated itself to the point that was earlier made. It's been a very long time to come that law was able to go to market, if you like. It was restricted from marketing. It was restricted from engaging clients. That in and of itself has kind of separated law from other professions, and it hasn't learned as much from other professions about how they go to market. And then there's a tendency to think we're different, we're special, but these underlying basic principles are actually quite similar across different other professions. And this is one of the things that we like to look at and bring into how we educate and train lawyers to go to market. One other thought here, when you boil down where people struggle, where lawyers struggle, it's on three major buckets of things. They struggle in finding opportunities, to the point made earlier. They struggle around converting opportunities, a thing that's not talked about an awful lot inside of law firms. we may have an opportunity, but how best should we convert that? And what are the sets of skills and tools that we need to go do that? And we have talked about this, the nudging to do BD, the tendency to avoid it, to not put it into a rhythm, as Stephen said, to not systematize it and process. The very best people have this very rigorous process. How do we nudge folks to do that? So those are the three areas that most lawyers seem to struggle at. And when you break those out into saying, well, what skills do they need? There tends to be 9 things. One of the things we've also learned is you cannot teach lawyers who are very busy, who have a very kind of specific way of engaging their clients, a standard end-to-end methodology. It doesn't work, right? You can't say, let's go take one of the world-class methodologies from outside of law, like Miller Hyman or whoever it is, plop it into law and make these guys run with that. It's not going to work. What you can do is you can target what we call these pivot points. You can teach and educate lawyers some of the most important, impactful points that they can have in their client relationship process, and teach them to get better at those things. And I'll give you some examples. We talked a little bit about networks earlier. We talked a little bit about forming habits, but helping them focus on what are the right accounts. You often see lawyers over years have this kind of what we call the long tail of accounts, where they've got a lot of accounts that are paying maybe a few $100 or pounds or yen a year that aren't actually very valuable. They're a huge distraction. How do we focus on the accounts that are really going to grow? If you look at top client developers, they're instinctively able to pick an account and say, this one is going to be a big account over time. I'm going to spend my time on it. And they get that right more than not, right? And so the interesting thing that happens in the way they evaluate that account and the time they spend on the account, quite different from the average performer. So helping our lawyers kind of master these pivot points or get better at these pivot points, selecting accounts, operating a pitch. What do they do when they lose a deal? How do they handle that conversation? These are all major pivot points in the client development life cycle that we believe we can teach them, and then they can get better at those things. And that then leads to bigger books of business. We do believe we can teach everybody elements of these 9 things that will help them, no matter who they are, that will help them. And we've got a lot of case studies now that show even the most resistant lawyer who struggled to engage clients, or didn't want to engage clients, once they've seen some very basic things that they can do to evolve the relationship across these elemental pieces of their client development life cycle, they then start to change their behavior, because this is about behavior change. When you think about those kind of comments we heard up front, getting lawyers to shift position and do things they don't want to do is clearly about behavioral change. Okay, so just want to share some thoughts there. And then, Stephen, we want to talk about generational. How much time do we have, Patrick? How much have we got left now?
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to make a suggestion, which is get rid of the PowerPoint and let's go to the Boom dialogue. Okay. So that's everybody's on the same screen. And what would be great is those that haven't had a chance to actually speak yet, jump in. So we've had some great discussion from some great folk, and it's all been very valuable. And I think people are learning a great deal. But the whole concept is that people who haven't had a chance to to contribute get to contribute. So I'll move it over to David MacArthur. Poor you, David. But if you're there, please come on. Okay, maybe David's getting a tea.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. Happy New Year, everyone. From Beijing, China.